Thanks for that great introduction. It's not often I get a nice introduction lately. You know, it is kind of interesting. You come in and they make you go through this makeup place there, and Tanya, really nice lady, takes one look at me and says, "Here's a bag, just put this over your head, you'll be good." It's a tough world, I recognize that. Good to see you, thanks for being here. I want to give you a couple thoughts here, talk for about the next, I think I've got about an hour and a half, and then, no, okay. Give you some thoughts on cybersecurity, and then we're going to go into a question and answer period. When I look at the threats that face this country and face our allies, there are two things that concern me. That's terrorism and cyber. Those are the two things that can impact our countries and cause us a lot of damage. I really appreciate Bloomberg putting on this conference so we can talk about the second, or cyber, because I think that's how countries who wish us harm and others are going to reach out and impact us. It is interesting to note that over the last 14 months, we've seen over 350 attacks, distributed denial of service attacks on Wall Street, with varying levels of success. In August of 2012, the whole world saw an attack on Saudi Aramco, a destructive attack on their computer systems. That attack wiped out the data on over 30,000 systems. Imagine if that hit Wall Street, the impact it would have on our nation's finances and the global financial structure that we have. Those types of catastrophic attacks are in our future. We have to prepare for them. And the reason that I'm here today is this is something that government cannot do by itself. This is something that government, industry, and our allies have to work together. And so the purpose of me coming here is to help explain and articulate parts of those partnerships. From my perspective, that partnership starts with some legislation, and I think Michael Daniel and Suzanne Spalding came and talked a little bit about the legislation. But we need a way for industry to tell us when there's an attack going on. Because contrary to public opinion, we cannot see all of that. We don't see all of that. So an attack going into Wall Street, the chances of us seeing it in time to do something about it is very small, especially for a destructive attack. As a consequence, how can we work with the internet service providers and Wall Street to know that such an attack is going on? Let me give you some insights on how I believe this partnership should work, and then talk about 5 key things that Cyber Command and NSA are doing to prepare for our portion of this. Many of you probably came down from New York. I saw that many of the folks here from Bloomberg came down from New York, had a ride. Some of you live here in Washington, but all of you know the Highway 95 between here and New York City, right? And you drive that. Many of you have an Easy Pass, right? I think everybody knows what an Easy Pass is. You put that in your car. And when you drive up the New Jersey Turnpike, you can go right through the fast lane, and it scans your car and says you're good to go. How do we scan traffic to know that it's good to go in such a way that we protect our civil liberties and privacy and ensure it's not something that's going to destroy our financial networks? Our thoughts on that is this is where government and industry can work together. We don't need the contents of that. We don't need to know anything more than it's a bad packet and it came from point A and it's going to point B. And industry and government can work together here. But to do that, especially for government to provide us that information, we need legislation. So how would that work? If a bad packet is coming into Wall Street, the internet service providers would see that. They could tip FBI, DHS, and NSA and Cyber Command the fact of that packet, where it's going to and where it's coming from, at network speed. At network speed, that's the key. In order to respond to these types of threats, that information has to be at network speed. And we've got to come up with the rules and the operational concepts to actually work at network speed if we're going to stop some of these. From Cyber Command's perspective and NSA's, there's 5 key things that we need to do our portion of it, and then I'll talk a little bit about industry. First, and perhaps most important, when you look at this area, the number one thing, from my perspective, is a trained and ready force. That's the key. You know, we can take all the equipment we have, use a bulldozer, mow it out, put in a new set of infrastructure, but the key is trained people. Trained and ready. They have to understand this. We have to train them to that standard. This is the key thing for building that force. If you don't have that, and if they aren't trained to the right level, they will never detect the threats that are going on in our networks, period. The second, we do have to have operational concepts and command and control. And I think what DOD and our nation has done is put that together in what we call Team Cyber. That's the integration of NSA and Cyber Command as a team up there, alongside DHS and FBI. We have to have a team and a concept that says, if an attack is going into Wall Street, we have to know how we're going to work it. So in that example I used, NSA and Cyber Command do not respond inside the United States. That would be the role of the FBI, so they need those tools. Outside, we'd work with our allies. That's where NSA and Cyber Command would come in. So that operational concept would say, how do we stop it, and how do we tell the right authorities what's coming, so we can then look at and see what type of attack this would be. Some of you might consider, could we have industry do the counterattack here? That's a question that we often get asked. My thoughts, no. You're now getting into a nation-state responsibility. Because if we get it wrong, we do not want a industry rep or a bank firing back and going against somebody who was themselves a victim, which in this space could very easily happen. So it's got to be at a government level. And when I say at a government level, part of that in the operational concept is not for me to make the decision. Let me be clear on that. I'm not the decision maker. We provide the options. The Secretary of Defense and the President make those decisions. Period. Civilian authority. That's the way it is. That's the way it should be. Third, a defensible architecture. How are we going to defend our systems? For industry and the government, this is an issue that we all have to work. And this is one of the areas that you can come in on and weigh in heavily on. I will use the DOD's networks as a way of articulating the problems that we face. Within the Defense Department, we have 15,000 enclaves, each with different system administrators, each with their own firewalls, each which present a potential vulnerability if they're not patched at the same time. Think of this having 15,000 groups of people trying to patch a network at the same speed. What is the probability that will happen? 0. Somebody's going to make a mistake. And that mistake in cyberspace means that an adversary has a good probability of getting access to our network. It's the same thing for industry. So how do you fix that? I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. So I want you to know I do have a sense of humor. So how are we going to fix it? I think this is where the thin virtual cloud comes in. We have to have an architecture that allows us to patch at network speed and fix and reconfigure problems at network speed. We have to address those problems at network speed. It can't be at the speed of people. It has to be at the speed of the network if we're ever going to get out in front of this. And so, you know, one of the things that NSA did is they built a system called the Cumulo and pushed it out to openware, so it's available to everybody. It has a secure layer, and it has a way of authenticating and real-time tipping and queuing, and it's something that you all ought to look at. And the reason that we pushed it out to the open source community is this is something that we can work collaboratively for better defense for all of us. And I've talked to many of our allies, they are using it too. So this is something that we can all use for the good of everyone there. And it's all openware, and the good price, and the good news is the price is really good. It's free. I like that. How do we see cyberspace as the fourth issue? Today, when you talk about, if somebody talks about an attack into your network, ask them to draw you a picture. Say, so we're being attacked. Can you draw me a picture of what that looks like? And ask two different groups to draw the picture. And here's the issue. If you can't describe what's happening so that all the decision makers understand it, how are you going to respond? And what happens if it's more than your network? We need shared situational awareness in cyberspace. We're working that, we call that the Cyber Common Operational Picture, but we also have to have that in shared space with industry. So that's one of the key things, that industry and government have to work together. How do you see the threats? Think of this as seeing packets from space of airplanes. If you have good airplanes and bad airplanes coming in, how do we sort those out? We do that for our air defense. How do we do it for our cyber defense? And how do we share that with our allies? That's a key issue that we have to address in solving some of the problems coming up. Authorities is the last one. If we're going to act here, we have to have the authorities. As I started out, I am not the decision maker. We provide the options. The Secretary of Defense and the President are the policy makers, and it's their decision on when we act and when we don't act. But we have to set up some of the authorities, what we'll call the rules of the road, or from a military perspective, what are the rules of engagement? We are actually working that with the Defense Department, the White House, and others, and Michael Daniel may have given you some insights to that. But those, I think, absolutely should be on the table. And they should be transparent so everyone knows. Now, finally, I'd like to just address two quick issues. I see I'm 2:12 over. Industry. I started out with government cannot do this alone. 80 to 90% of all our infrastructure or more is owned by industry. This is a critical part of our country. We're going to have to work with industry to solve this problem. And the internet is not just a US internet, it's a global internet. We have to work with our allies and partners and come up with a framework for doing it. If we're going to solve this problem, it's going to be done in partnerships between government, our government, industry, and with our allies. With that, I guess I'm supposed to sit in the second chair and Trish is going to come up.
So thank you, General, for being here today. On behalf of everyone at Bloomberg and at Symantec and everyone in this room, we thank you for being here. There's a lot to talk about. Cybersecurity front and center on everyone's mind. In fact, yesterday, the President met with the CEOs of Symantec, Bank of America, Visa, a number of companies, to discuss cybersecurity weakness that's facing corporate America right now. What do you consider the financial system's greatest online vulnerabilities right now?
Well, I think there's a couple. The one that we see right now used most against the financial industries is distributed denial of service attacks, or those attacks where they push a lot of information into networks to prevent others from communicating. That's a nuisance that can easily get to a severe problem if the networks were to collapse. That's the first part. The second that we all face is vulnerabilities in much of our infrastructure. Software vulnerabilities that allows those with bad intentions to get into the network, and once they're in the network, to do things. If you think about what happened to Saudi Aramco, someone got into their networks and brought what we call a payload, or a piece of destructive malware, or a series of destructive malware that went into parts of their network and destroyed the data on that network. My concern is some kind of attack that uses both distributed denial of service and a destructive payload. If you wiped out the data in some of our financial sector at the closing portion of the day, think of what that would mean for our banks and for our financial industry. Because much of our financial worth is done on the networks, as is the global community. That's a problem and something that we have to address. It's not just the financial communities. This is a government industry problem.
Do you think then that financial institutions ought to actually perhaps receive a rating? They do right now based on their credit worthiness that's attached to their ability to fight off any kind of cyber attack. I mean, does there need to be some accountability in the financial system to make sure that we're not vulnerable?
I know a lot of people talk about this. My personal thoughts are the financial industry actually does a real good job of protecting their networks given what they can do. I think the issue that we really see is there are things that the government knows that is classified. How do we share that with industry so that they're protected? It goes beyond that which they can protect. I think that's a greater problem. Now that doesn't mean that they shouldn't have a certain standard. So I think we ought to figure out how to set that certain standard up. And then how do we create the relationship so government and industry can work together to share to get them to where they really need to be. So what I'm saying specifically is hackers and criminal stuff, banks, Wall Street, they do a pretty good job about addressing that. When we get into nation states and others that want to do us harm, that goes beyond the capacity of those financial networks. So any framework that we set up has to take those two aspects into account. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Let me get to something that's been in the news as of late. Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel is accusing the U.S. of spying on her via her cell phone. And the president is considering asking your agency to suspend its monitoring of allied leaders. Are we eavesdropping on Chancellor Merkel?
Yeah, there's a great article by the French 24 paper. Tony Todd, I think, did it, 24 October. So some of you with Google, with devices that you can use to Google that. Scorsini made a comment that all the nations over there are spying on everybody. So let's start with a statement by a foreign intelligence service that says everyone's doing that. I think the most important thing, without directly talking about what we do or will not do in the future, is to say, if Scorsini's comments are right, the real question is, what should we do in the future?
Well, are they right? Is that a yes? Is everybody supposed
So that was a question. What was your answer? I would not say that Scorsini's a liar. I think Scorsini is a great person. So I'm not going to accuse him of that. But let me just take this one step further. Partnerships, I think, are very important here, and it goes both ways. And I think what Scorsini has put out there is accurate. Countries act in their best interests. Countries and their intelligence services receive requirements to go after what's in their nation's interests. So from our perspective, I think the question that's really on the table is which is the greater national interest? And that's a policy decision, and one that I think our policymakers are looking at.
How is it in our national interest to eavesdrop on allies?
Well, that's part of the National Intelligence Priorities Framework, and there was a series of great statements by Director Jim Clapper in testimony yesterday. So I won't review all that because I know he got that far better than I would. He walked through that whole framework, and that's public, so you can grab that from there.
Well, one of the things he did was he suggested that, in fact, this happens, and that Chancellor Merkel likely knew that this was happening. So is she making something out of nothing, in your opinion? Is she creating a media, or playing the media, expressing all this outrage?
I don't know. I mean, you know, being completely transparent and honest, I don't know what she knows and don't know. I would tell you this. I think, from my perspective, where do we as nations need to go? And if the issue that's on the table here is cybersecurity, I think that's a very important issue. I think counterterrorism and our partnerships. These are huge issues. So what should we do on that? I think we should sit down, because let's assume that Scorsini's right. Everybody's spying on everybody. So everybody sitting around one of these tables, every one of you is spying on everybody else. But the real question is, what can hurt our countries? We agree that it's terrorism and cyber. So the question from a policy perspective, not mine, but from a policy that we're now asking is there a better way to move forward? How would you answer that?
Is there?
That's it.
I'll
Is
ask
it?
you.
I asked you, you asked me, you asked you. I think there is. I think the partnerships in some cases are more important. But we have to define it, and it has to be both ways. We cannot be naive to say, well, it's just us or just them. If everybody's doing everybody on that table, what you really want, spying on everybody, that's what I meant. That was close. What you need to do is to say, so, look, there's two threats that can hurt us, cyber and CT. I think we absolutely need to relook this. And I think what the President's Review Group is doing and what the policymakers are doing are addressing that. You now know where I sit, not next to you, but on this issue. And that is, I'll slow down for the rest of you. I think this partnership with Europe is absolutely important. But it's got to be done with everybody coming to the table. And as you suggested, let's put off all the sensationalism and stuff and say, is there a better way for our countries to partner? You know, I spent 6.5 years in Germany. I have great partners in France and Germany and throughout the rest of Europe. My answer to that, I believe there is. I think it's something that we have to do in a deliberate process, and we need to sit down with them. Because for our country, we need to solve that terrorism and cyber issue.
But have all these allegations that have come forward from Edward Snowden, in fact, hurt that process, hurt those partnerships, causing more problems on the international relation front or more problems with you and your agency trying to coordinate with overseas intelligence agencies?
Yes. That was good. So you asked a multi-part question. I answered yes. You got to figure out which part.
Yeah.
It does hurt, and on a couple of issues here. It's like saying at the table now, only one of you can be accused of it, but all of you are doing it. So what is and how do you fix that? And the answer from my perspective, you saw in the press yesterday that not all this stuff is accurate. It is not accurate. You know, the perception that NSA is collecting 70 million phone calls on France or Spain or Italy is factually incorrect. That's not our collection. What would we do with that? Think
So
about
this is actually Europe collecting data on Europeans?
No. This is actually countries working together in support of military operations, collecting what they need to do to protect our forces in areas where we act together as nations. And in our counterterrorism efforts, it has nothing to do with collection on Europe. Period.
Multiple countries then?
Multiple
working together.
countries. I think where do multiple countries work? I've got to figure that out.
So given that there's information that you've pointed out is false that's being reported in the media and that you needed to come out and correct, how does the NSA stay ahead and in control of the story so that the right facts are actually out there when there's so much secrecy around the program? You know,
that's a great question because you're hitting at the heart. You know, we're an intelligence agency, and here's the way we acted. So I'm going to come back and push part of this because you as Bloomberg News will have greater insights than I do on how to do this. But here's the issue for our country. So NSA is really good about finding terrorists. Look at all the things that we've done to protect this country and our allies. 54 different events, 41 terrorist-related plots, 13 of those material support to terrorism. We do a great job protecting us and our allies in Europe. How do we do that? Well, think about the work we do in Iraq and Afghanistan and around the world. We have great insights to terrorists. But if a terrorist is calling into the United States, how do you know if that's a bad number or a good number? And so what NSA's job would be is to help you understand that it's a bad person calling and give that to the FBI. We don't want to collect, and we don't collect the content of U.S. persons' emails or phones. But that's hyped out in the press and everybody says, oh, they must be listening to everything. Think about, we don't have enough people to do that. Why would we do it? There's no intelligence value. Here's the fact, though. For the good of this nation, we're holding this hornet's nest, okay, called the business record FISA, so that we can defend this country. I would love to give this hornet's nest to someone else and say, you get stung by this, but don't drop it because that's our country. And if we do drop it, the chance that a terrorist attack gets through increases, and that would be wrong. So NSA, Chris, and the other leaders of NSA said, we'll take the beating because it's right for this country to know that we're going to protect. We don't do a good job of explaining it. We really don't. And we don't get out in front of the press for one reason. We don't want to make a mistake. If we make a mistake, there's a chance a terrorist act would get through and people die, and that's because we were stupid in public, and we don't want to do that. So now, coming back to your question, so how do you do that? How do we work with the press? I'm thinking, is there a press place around here and people in the press that could help us? You might know one. That was a joke, I'm sorry. She was writing down, do we know anybody in the press? Nope, can't think of anybody. So the answer is, how do we do that? Here's the reality. Think about this. You now know that that's false. And many people knew that the facts of this collection in Europe was false. But look at how long that story was up here, and the fact that it was false and put out by the White House a week ago didn't get any traction. Why? The traction is selling newspapers on false stuff rather than putting the facts out.
General, we're getting some news that's crossing right now, being reported in the Washington Post, that there are new Snowden allegations that say the NSA broke into Yahoo and Google's databases worldwide, that they infiltrated these databases. This is just crossing as I speak. Can you confirm or deny that?
Not to my knowledge, that's never happened. In fact, there was this allegation last June that NSA was tapping into the servers of Yahoo or Google or our industry reps. That is factually incorrect. The servers and everything that we do with those companies work with us. They are compelled to work with us. This isn't something the courts have said, would you please work with them and just throw data over it. It is compelled, and these are specific requirements that come from a court order. This is not NSA breaking into any databases. It would be illegal for us to do that. And so I don't know what the report is, but I can tell you factually, we do not have access to Google servers, Yahoo servers, ... We go through a court order. We issue that court order to them through the FBI. And it's not millions, it's thousands of those that are done, and it's almost all against terrorism and other things like that. It has nothing to do with U.S. persons. If we want to get the content of a U.S. person's email or phone number, now here's a key. Most of the incidents that we have are finding out that a person in a foreign government is a dual U.S. person. That's a violation for us. Or it's a terrorist, but it's also a U.S. person. That's a violation for us. We have to expunge all that communication and go get a court order or work through the Attorney General. So I don't know where all these allegations, but here's the hard part. So let me ask you this. So when you get something like that people throw out that's spurious, how do you fix that? Any insights?
How do you?
Well, no, I asked you. You're the press
You're
person.
the expert. You're the expert.
Well, so, I mean,
so are you saying in this particular, and again, we don't have all the details, but Edward Snowden saying that the NSA had infiltrated Yahoo and Google databases, would one assume then that if in fact the NSA was looking at any data that these companies had, they did so via a court order?
That's correct. And so the question is, I don't know what his allegation is. NSA does collect information on terrorists and on our national intelligence priorities. But we are not authorized to go into a U.S. company's servers and take data. We have to go through a court process for doing that.
So let me ask you, in light of all of these allegations, has the PRISM...
Oh, can I add one thing on that last statement?
Please do.
Because if you think about it, these same companies that we issue court orders to, other countries around the world do the same thing to them. Many of them in their lawful intercept program. They go to one of these service providers and say, do you have any information here? It's the same process that we use. And so this is not something that our government does different than others. From my perspective, the one thing our country does that goes far beyond is that we have a framework, a legal framework that says here's how you're going to do it as an intel agency. If you were to compare that with all the intelligence agencies around the world, you'd see few that have a court process for doing it with the oversight that we have. So that might be something to look at.
Well, this was one of the things that has shocked so many Americans. I think this learning that the NSA and some of these technology companies were working in cooperation with each other via court orders. Have you been affected at all? I mean, has your agency seen less cooperation from the Facebooks and Googles of the world as a result of Snowden's information?
There are issues that those companies have, and part of this, to be fair to those companies, they are compelled by court order before and today. It is not an option for them. They would be in contempt of court if they don't comply. And I think the issue is, the way it's put out is as if they're just throwing data to us. They are not. From my perspective, what they're doing is they provide us, just like they do other countries who ask for data, those countries that come forward with a correct warrant get what they are in their own countries. So we do the same thing. I think this is one of the areas that is grossly misunderstood and needs to be fixed, because from where I sit, our companies are doing the right thing. They comply with the court order, and yes, they know at times, many times, they're help stopping a terrorist event.
A lot of Americans worry that it's too easy to get a court order. Is it?
Wow. No, there was, and there's some great articles by some of the judges on this. Judge Walton did recently, so you can look that up. The facts are, I know what everybody says, but you go look at the facts. In this area here, it's harder than it is in a Title III warrant or criminal case. So think about that. This was mentioned yesterday by the Deputy Attorney General in the hearing, and they said, we are making this harder for us to go after terrorist information than we do some of our own criminal. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But that's the way we've set up this framework. And that's to ensure that we're doing our part right. And so I believe if we could lay everything out, here becomes the issue. If we could have all the terrorists in the room, please leave for a minute, we could put this data out and give everybody everything that we know. The issue is, not only are you listening, but they're listening too. And they learn from this. We have seen them make changes. What this means is that the probability of a successful terrorist attack has increased. That's the irreversible and substantial damage to this nation. That's what causes us great concern.
Still, not everyone agrees. I mean, I'll cite Representative Sensenbrenner, who's introducing legislation to end bulk collection of data, such as what we're talking about here. And he's actually the very congressman who wrote the section of the Patriot Act that has been used to justify the NSA's broad surveillance activities. Even he's saying that it's been misinterpreted. Do you think that the NSA's program really stands on strong legal footing?
Well, it stands on strong legal footing. The issue is, what will the policymakers in Congress authorize in the future? That's a decision that they have to make. My job is to explain the gap, the threat, and the risks. Their job is to legislate, knowing those gaps and risks. We will follow the rules and the laws and the policies as given to us. But you and the rest of the people need to know, if there's a gap, we want you to know. You see, in 9/11, prior to 9/11 and after 9/11, the intelligence community was beat up for failing to connect the dots. What that means is we know stuff about what's going on overseas. FBI knows stuff here in the States. How do you connect the dots? That's where this metadata comes together. There is no information on U.S. persons other than a to-from phone number, a date, time, group, and a duration of the call. Your name's not in there, my name's not in there. And what that allows us to do is understand, is there a terrorism nexus to this call chain? If not, nothing happens. If there is, we pass that to the FBI. They go through the correct procedures. If you don't have that, so my question to everybody is, I am looking for, and there are some technology people here, if you have a better way of doing it, we should do it. I am all for a better way.
Well, if the representative's bill in fact becomes law, how would that affect your ability to do your job?
Well, it means we stop that part, and it means there's a gap. We'll do the best we can, but the ability to see what's inside and going on and us to provide that doesn't exist there. We'd have to come up with a workaround, and those are very hard. We haven't been able to come up with one. So that puts, do you remember the Midar, San Diego, 9/11? So Midar was in San Diego, but we didn't have a database that would allow us to see that he was actually in San Diego and part of that call chain. He was one of the people on American Airlines Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon. So how do we fix that? So I think the question is, there's a risk. This will be a congressional debate. We'll follow whatever there is. My job is to articulate those risks, Congress to legislate, and the executive branch will weigh in. And this is where it needs to be transparent to the American people. Why do we do it that way? Well, that's the way our process works. We'll follow it. And if
The
the
process
choice
isn't easy lately. I
No,
mean, between
no,
the shutdown, this dysfunction in Washington, is that affecting you?
Well, it affects everybody. But you know, I think there are good people working hard trying to make this country work. And we have some significant problems with our debts and other things. And how you solve that, that's a big issue. That goes outside my area of expertise. But Bloomberg's got some insights on money.
Let me ask you about something that people are very curious about right now, and that's the question of how does this all happen? In other words, if you're collecting data on world leaders, how much does the president know? When does he know it? President Obama said he did not know that the NSA was eavesdropping on Merkel and other world leaders. Who's actually deciding here who we should target?
So the National Intelligence Priority Framework actually is the one that sets all that up. And again, I defer to the discussion that Jim Clapper put out yesterday because I thought that was an excellent overview of how that whole process works. So I just urge you to go to that.
Does the president receive daily briefings?
He talked to that. So I don't actually, I'm not in all those briefings and I can't tell. I can tell you this. You know, when I look at the president and others, these are people trying to do the right thing for this country on both sides of the aisle. I don't see anybody acting, and I don't see anybody lying. I think they're just trying to do the right thing. This is a tough area. And the question is, so, you know, I think the real question that we face is how do we work with our allies? That's the real issue. From our agency, from NSA, Chris Inglis and I, we're the director, deputy director. We're responsible. We're the ones who run that organization. Here's what we've told our people. Look, we're holding the hornet's nest. This is what the nation needs us to do. You guys defend the country and protect our civil liberties and privacy. We'll take the heat. Now, we didn't realize it'd get that hot.
What do you anticipate in terms of further revelations from Edward Snowden? I mean, here we were just moments ago and there was another report. We can probably assume that there are going to be many more over the coming weeks. What are you most concerned about there?
Well, I'm concerned that we give information out that impacts our ability to stop terrorist attacks. That's what most of these programs are aimed to do. I think everything that we've done, we've put out there. You know, I believe if you look at this and you go back through everything, none of this shows that NSA is doing something illegal or that it's not been asked to do. And in all those cases, so it's legal, it's necessary, and it's authorized in every case. If people say, well, I didn't, you know, in the press or the American people say, well, I didn't realize A, B, and C. Congress, the courts, the executive branch, all briefed on all those things. So from my perspective...
So are you saying that they were briefed on surveillance
programs.
for world leaders?
No, I'm saying the business record FISA, FAA 702 and all this. What I'm talking about there is on these programs, we all came together as a country, and this is, I think from my perspective, that's on the table. Some of that was done with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court for a reason, a classified court. Because as we mentioned, if we bring it out to everybody in the room, then the terrorists will know how we're stopping them. That's not in our nation's interest. So from where I sit, I'm concerned that we will do things that continue to impact our nation's security. That's the key. And what that means is the chance of a terrorist act getting through has increased. And that's wrong.
You think a chance of a terror attack because of these
leaks
from Snowden
Yes.
is higher now?
I do, absolutely. Because terrorist groups are changing the way they operate. It makes our finding them and tracking them more difficult. And the people who will pay are innocent people here in our country and overseas. And that's wrong, and it should stop.
You'll be retiring from your position this spring. The timing of that, was that in any way linked to the Snowden
No.
relation?
No, in fact, that's been going on for many years. I came in 2005 on a 3-year job, but being unable to count, and actually not being able to get a job, no. So, well, I got extended in 2009, then 2009 to 2010 to 2013. I was asked in 2012 to extend to 2014, and we agreed that would be the last one back before Snowden. And so this is something that's been in the works. I'll have almost 40 years in the service and almost 9 years at NSA. And there's great people coming up behind us who will do a great job of leading this.
What is their biggest challenge going to be? The biggest challenge for your successor?
Biggest challenge, let's see. Hopefully, we'll have addressed the issues that we're currently facing and move forward with our partners, industry, and allies. And so theirs will be building that new future, how we do that for the good of our nation and our allies. And we need to move beyond the media leaks. My job is to help us do that.
Before I let you go, if you could just tell us, what do you tell Americans who are worried that the NSA is reading their emails or listening to their cell phones or seeing who they text? What do you tell the average person out there?
So that's not true. We're not doing that. And if we, and for one, it would be the FBI that would go under a court order. So you need a court order to get the content of a communications, whether it's email or phone. And for NSA, our job is foreign intelligence. So the fact that people say we're listening to phone calls or reading emails, I see all the cartoons out there, but the reality is it's factually incorrect. That's not our mission. Our mission is to know what's going on outside the country and tell you about the threats that are coming into it. And so that's where the business record FISA and all this comes. And all that dealing that we have with these companies under FAA 702 is not about people here. It's one end foreign. It's on the other guy out there, and that their comms are stored here. So when you think about that, this is where the press can really help inform the American people on these facts. I think this is very critical for our future. If we stop doing some of this, we're going to create a gap. Now, at some point, I'll get to set down this hornet's nest. Somebody else will pick it up. If no one picks it up, we got a problem. It doesn't mean that we don't have a problem today, that there aren't people trying to get through. It's clear. Just this month, over 2,300 people were killed in 5 countries by terrorist-related attacks. Look up the statistics. For 2012, over 15,000 in a CNN report and 8,500 terrorist-related attacks. Why hasn't that happened here? Why have we been so successful? It's not by accident. It's because you have great people in the military and the intelligence community doing everything they can with law enforcement to protect this country. But they need tools to do it.